Chapter 17, Face Off. See, like, face off. But, like, I don't know if it's face off. When my father saw the look on my face, he glanced at Miss Schwartz. She nodded back, and he crossed to where I stood. "Come on, Stoney," he said. "Let's talk a bit." I nodded, though I didn't know how we would talk, since I didn't think I could speak at all. Susan Simmons was the best person I knew. Bright, funny, and kind. She had plenty of friends, yet she had been willing to be my friend when everyone else brushed me off as a geek. She was the only one who had never tried to stop Duncan from beating me up, and had gotten her... Who had ever tried to stop Duncan. I meant Duncan, not Bunkin. And had gotten herself a black eye in the process. She was a fighter for the good, the kind of kid who would change the world when she grew up, and I couldn't imagine the world without her. My father led me into the little room with a desk, a couple of chairs, and a shabby couch. He sat me on the couch. "I thought you were going to lose it there for a moment, pal," he said, trying to sound friendly. He had never called me pal when I was his son. I closed my eyes. "Susan is my best friend," I said. He nodded. "I'm sure you wouldn't want to lose her." I heard an edge of pain in his voice, the sound of something catching in his throat. "Did you ever lose someone you loved?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment without answering, then nodded. "Several times." Several times? What did that mean? My mother, maybe? And possibly me, though I found that hard to believe. But that didn't make several. What was he talking about? I realized that I knew hardly anything about him. But then, he had never told me. Of course, I had never asked. I had never had the chance before. "Who did you lose, mister?" He shook his head. "I don't like to talk about it." I shrugged. "That's okay. I don't talk much about what I feel either. It's safer that way." He actually laughed then, though it was a small, sad sound. "Okay, Stoney, you nailed me. That's what I'm supposed to be working on these days, not holding so much inside. That's one of the reasons I'm here." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Do you work here?" "On a volunteer basis. That's my girlfriend in the other room. I started coming here to pick her up after work. Before I knew it, I was getting involved with some of the kids." "Why didn't you ever get involved with me?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I said calmly, "How did you meet her?" I really wanted to know that, since he had never bothered to go to school events when I was living at home. He looked at me for a moment, as if he was trying to decide how much to say. "How much do you know about this alien scare?" he asked at last. A little," I said cautiously. "Ever hear of a kid named Peter Thompson?" "Maybe. Was he on the news or something?" "Not really. The authorities pretty much hushed things up, but rumors get around." He stood up and walked away from me. "Peter was about your age," he said, glancing out the window. I tried to make my heart of stone. I knew I had to, or else I wouldn't be able to hear this, wouldn't be able to get through it without running from the room, and I had to hear, had to know what he would say. "So you knew this kid, Peter?" I prodded. My father closed his eyes and whispered, "I was his father." Then he opened his eyes, looked right into mine, and said, "Only I wasn't very good at it." He turned away again. Why am I telling you this story? To take my mind off my friend? "Who are you?" he asked, reminding me of the number of times I had asked the same question of Hulan. "Stoney." He shrugged. If that's all you want to tell for now, it's all right. That's one of the rules around here. We don't ask too much right away. Look, Stoney, I don't know if you've run away, how you're connected to those people in the other room, where your family is, anything about you. Even so, I'm going to tell you the rest of my story because I think you ought to hear it. Maybe there's someone who loves you more than you think. Maybe there's a place you ought to go back to." "Interesting idea," I replied. Peter Thompson was my son, and in my opinion he was just about the brightest kid who ever walked the face of the earth. I loved him more than I can tell you, only I never showed it very much. I didn't know how. It happens to some people, men especially. It happens when you never meet your father, and your mother dies when you're too old to get adopted. It happens when your wife takes off with another guy and you're left with a kid you love but don't know how to raise. He stopped and took a deep breath. I poured myself into my work. I figured that was a good idea. I'd make money, and that would be a good way to love my kid because he would have stuff that I never did. Except it wasn't good enough. Because the one thing I had wanted most myself when I was a kid was exactly what I didn't give him. I didn't give him a father. "Stay Stoney," I told myself. Keep your heart a stone, or you'll never be able to endure this. Anyway, this alien came to my kid's school. Peter and his friend, she was named Susan, like your friend in the other room there, they figured it out, but they couldn't get anyone to believe them. His shoulders sagged. Peter never even tried telling me. I wish he had. I get mad about that sometimes. Mad that he didn't trust me, didn't give me a chance. Then I realized he had been giving me chances for years, but had finally given up. Well, Peter was a bright one, like I told you. He loved to read science fiction. That came from me. I gave him his first science fiction books. I blinked. I had forgotten that. His one great dream was to explore other planets. He thought it was humankind's destiny. So when his friend Susan figured out how to drive off the planet, what did Peter do? He paused, then announced in triumph, as if he knew I could tell. He paused, then announced in triumph, as if he knew I could never have guessed it. He went with him. My God, do you realize how brave that kid was? What a thing to do. His eyes were shining with pride. He was proud. Proud of me. I had never seen that before. I felt my stony heart begin to crack, begin to split inside of me. For a long time I refused to believe what had really happened. He continued. Hold on. For a long time I refused to believe what had really happened. He continued. I thought Peter had just run away from home. I traveled all over the state looking for him, going to every kid shelter I could find. That was how I met my girlfriend in there. See, she used to be Peter's teacher, but she left because of the alien thing, and so she was working at this place. When I came here looking for Peter, she finally convinced me of what had really happened. She knew him better than I did, I guess. She was pretty rough on me for a while. Wouldn't let me forget what a jerk I had been with Peter, but even though she thought I was a clod, we had something in common. We both lost something to the aliens. He paused and said, Funny how the worst things in your life can lead to the best things. Sure is, I whispered. Anyway, I guess the real reason I'm here, the reason I'm trying to help some of these kids is that I hope if I do, maybe someone, somewhere, will help my boy too. It's my bargain with the universe, Stoney. I don't know if the universe will hold up at the end, if anyone ever will help Peter, but it's the best I can do. He paused, then looked me in the eye again. Let me tell you something, kid. If you love someone, don't keep it a secret. Don't ever let them get away from you without making sure they know that you care. I wish. He choked a bit here, and the tears started to roll down his cheeks. I wish I had told Peter. The stone that used to be my heart cracked in two. You just did, Dad, I whispered. Putting my fingers to my neck, I began to pull my mask from my face. My father stared at me in astonishment. I could see his lips begin to tremble. Then I lost sight of him for a second as I stripped the mask over my head. When I could see him again, his whole face was twisted with a joy so deep it was almost pain. Peter, he whispered. He held out his hands. I ran to him and buried my head against his chest. Though I had sworn I wouldn't, I started to cry. My father cried too. He held me tight, and I could feel him shaking as he wept for me, and for himself, and for everything that we had both lost, and then found again. I didn't have the heart then to tell him that this might be Earth's last day. Crazy! Wild! Chapter 18 is called E Putibus Unum. Sounds like Latin. I don't want to think about Latin right now. We'll see you in the next one.